Now, what is happening that since the very system, not just the conceptual system, but also the institutional system was very fast expanding. So there were two things. One, now who were the original inhabitants? The original inhabitants whom we know, who have been there around even before Shantiniketan Shantiniketan came into being, were the indigenous communities, Shantals, and people living in the non-Shantal villages, non-tribal villages as well. Now it's very interesting that people who did not belong to the tribal communities, they were a little reluctant to join Rabindranath Tagore's institution. Why? Because for them this was too liberal, too modern. And so the rural, it's very interesting that I came to know about this from a very senior friend of mine who had a relative in a village very close by. It's called Goalpara, near the river Kopai. And those days, like very early 20th century and late 19th century, the villages from Goalpara were reluctant to send their kids to Shantiniketan, although it's a matter of 2 kilometers. Whereas we are having children coming from 150 kilometers, 2000 kilometers from Mumbai, from Chennai, all over India, but not from the nearest village. Not that Shantiniketan was not accommodative or not inclusive, but there was a very serious social crisis in terms of social values. For example, co-education was not tolerated. Girls, boys learning together was not tolerated by the common people. It was a hard fact, very hard even for Rabindranath to swallow. But he was having students from all over the world. But coming back to your question, Nandalal Ghosh, for example, and there were others also, they took initiatives. The way Tagore took initiatives, and he sent Jyotirindranath Thakur and others to distant villages to collect folk music, Lalon Fokir songs, things like that. So Nandalal Ghosh used to send, he himself used to travel to all these villages and learn, know and collect and also accommodate those artists from these villages to do their works, not necessarily in a very institutional way, but used to have like workshops with them, where not that they were expected to learn from Kala Bhavan, we were expected to learn from them. The whole thing became very, very reverse. And secondly, when he came up with an idea that we should have an annual art fair every year, which finally started from 1972, he was very, very clear that we should be making more artworks following the kind of folk art, the tribal art which we see around. That should be our inspiration. That should also be made accessible for the common people, not only our individual artworks. So in a way, this place was not really emphasizing too much upon very individual, stylistic projects. It was more about, I would say, an anthropological research about this place, about the history, how much you can take, how much you cannot take. So it was a constant, I would say, a constant experimental art education. And therefore, what happened many years later, when one of our friends wanted to do a thorough research and document the syllabus of this place, he was pretty confused to see that every moment the syllabus of Kala Bhavan was changing. Because he was expecting a standardized, formalized syllabus, and which was actually against the ethos of Kala Bhavan. We would certainly have a kind of framework of syllabus, but not the real syllabus. The real syllabus should be as organic as a tree or nature. It should change, it should grow, it can also be altered depending on the students. Every student does not need the same syllabus. So these are now, in retrospect, when we look at them, we find them very, very progressive ideas. Although maybe at that point of time, not many people were able to recognize them, identify them, the worth of these thoughts. And yes, this is a very, very, very brief introduction to tell you how the beginning of this place came into being. But I also must add quickly that the way Kala Bhavan evolved over last more than 100 years, okay, we have seen fantastic changes, most desirable and highly welcome changes in the so-called syllabus, curriculum, our practice, and also approach to teaching. Now, this was also bound to happen also because we fortunately have the entire list of students from 1919 on record. And we look at the names, we see that the demography was highly multicultural, to say the least, multilinguistics. Till today, we have students coming from not only almost every possible part of India, but outside India as well, especially Southeast Asia. We also have had students from China, from Japan, once in a while from Europe, but almost continuously we get students from Southeast Asia, from Thailand, from South Korea, from Japan, right? And this is very important to note that the singularity of a cultural identity, pertaining to a cultural identity of a place, just does not exist, at least in Kala Bhavan. So therefore, the education system needs to keep itself alert to the changes, to the requirements, to the demands, and also to the cultural diversity of this place. And I believe, and many people, of course, we all share this belief with a lot of people, that this cultural diversity is the source of sustenance of whatever Kala Bhavan still stands for. Now that we have a history of more than 100 years, of course, we have seen the pros and cons. We have seen ups and downs. We have seen improvements. We have seen deteriorations. We have seen everything. But despite everything, that Kala Bhavan comes back, it emerges back because of a number of things, and one of them is the cultural diversity. That here, although the place is located in Bengal, Bengali being the mother tongue of this place, here we talk in Bengali. We don't speak in Bengali. Because if I speak in Bengali to one of my students, the other person would not be able to understand who comes from another part of India. Okay, we do use a colonial language, English, this being the most commonly understood language, but the point is to communicate. And culturally, people are coming with certain baggage from their own cultural sources and roots. So instead of de-baggaging them, we try to unpack those baggage. We try to see what they are carrying. And how do we do that? One of the things that I have seen from my student is here, that on the occasion of various cultural programs, students are expected to represent their cultural sources. Even during our Fine Arts Fair, when students put up their stalls, we encourage that students should cook food, prepare foods representing their culture. I think this is very important. Extreme, because there is a tendency to unify culture. In the name of unity, they finally, what they do, the diversity is completely killed. And what we really want to say is not the so-called superficial unification of culture, but how to make this diversity prosper and also proliferate in terms of their art productions and creativity. And now, if you're not too tired, we can make a quick tour inside Kala Bhavan.
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to first take you to a very, very old room over there. Can you please follow me?